Hello, my name is Rhianna. Thank you for being here. So it's currently the last day of May, and so far this year I've read a total of 51 books. And so in this video I thought I'd talk about my top 10 books that I've read so far this year out of the 51 that I've read. I want to quickly just go through every book I've read, and I'm going to do it in reading order because the list I have is in reading order, so you can get a taste of the kind of things I read. I tend to read a lot of literary fiction and some fantasy. That tends to be the vibe. But going on into the second half of the year, I do want to branch out a bit more, maybe read a bit more thriller, a bit more horror, a bit more genre fiction, just so I widen my reading a little bit more. Anyway, all the books that I've read so far this year: Fahrenheit 451, The Night in the Moth, My Dark Vanessa, There, The Coin, One Dark Window, Uprooted, The Pisces, Two Twisted Crowns, Mexican Gothic, The Everlasting, Oathbringer, The Fifth Season, The Lamb, The Obelisk Gate, The Shadow of the Gods, Court of Thorns and Roses, So Late in the Day, Martyr, A Darker Shade of Magic, The Idiot, The Wood at Midwinter, Jamaica Inn, The White Book, Stone Mattress, My Brilliant Friend John Proctor is the Villain, The Story of a New Name, Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, The Story of a Lost Child, Nettle and Bone, Antarctica, Silence of the Girls, Days of Abandonment, What You Are Looking For Is in the Library, Hungerstone, The Lying Life of Adults, Flesh, Troubling Love, Flashlight, Heart the Lover, The Correspondent, The Lost Daughter, The Mercy Step, Dominion, Berry Pickers, The Death of Ivan Illich, White Knights, Only Dull People Are Brilliant at Breakfast, Kindred, and Agnes Grey. So out of all of those, what are my top 10? Let's talk about it. So number 10 is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. So last year I read Rebecca and it became one of my new favourite books of all time. So this year I wanted to read more Daphne du Maurier, and this is a really fantastic gothic piece. So in this story we are following the protagonist Mary, and when her mother dies she becomes an orphan, so she goes to live with her aunt and uncle in an inn in Cornwall called Jamaica Inn, and she discovers that her aunt is quite shy and clearly abused, and the person who is abusing her is the uncle, who is one of the most, I don't know if I'd say interesting, one of my maybe favourite villains in classic literature. You really feel his malicious presence, not just in the inn but across the moors as a whole. And I love a good atmospheric gothic tale where you can really be transported onto those desolate moors of Cornwall. And this is also quite a plot driven story as well, so although it's very literary, there's also lots of twists and turns and it keeps you on the edge of your seat. And I think if you enjoyed Rebecca, if you like something like Dracula, Wuthering Heights, this is probably one that you would enjoy also. Next is Flashlight by Susan Choi. This I picked up because I read the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I had such an enjoyable time reading this book. We follow a family, so we have Cirque and his wife Anne, and we have their daughter Louisa, and there is also another character called Tobias as well. And what is significant about this family is that one day in Japan at the beach, Cirque is walking with Louisa late at night, and then Cirque goes missing, and Louisa can't really remember what happened, and the authorities presume that Cirque just drowned and died. And the novel centres around that moment, and the story is about before that moment and also after that moment, and also there is the mystery about what really happened to Cirque, which really keeps you reading. And the end of this book is really like a literary thriller. It's one of the there is one chapter which takes about an hour to read that is one of the most dramatic and tense chapters I've ever read. And I think you'll really enjoy this book if you love books that are looking at families, but not like perfect families. Not that any book really looks at what a perfect family is, because there's no such thing as a perfect family, but in this book the family really has its issues and feels very realistic as a consequence. I think you'll also enjoy this book if you like books that look at memory and how things you experience as a child may kind of elude you in adulthood or be something that you don't really understand in adulthood. I really enjoyed the character of Cirque, Anne, Louisa and Tobias. They're all very flawed individuals. Sometimes they do things that maybe aren't that nice, but they're also just very realistic characters that I found myself really rooting for. Next is Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. This is a literary fantasy book which is a retelling of the Iliad from Boreas's perspective, but we also get Achilles' perspective as well. I hadn't read the Iliad prior to reading this book, but I don't think that is necessary. It's a very accessible book. you can really understand what is going on even if you don't have the context of having read the Iliad. I really like the character of Briseis and how she tries to overcome this terrible situation that she finds herself in. That situation is that her city falls and so she becomes a slave of Achilles. And I think you'd enjoy this book if you like Greek retellings, if you like books that have elements of fantasy but also elements of a literary novel as well, which is something that I really enjoy, but I don't think there's a lot of it out there. I mean, I'm sure there is, I just haven't delved into it enough, I guess. Next is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Now, this book is a fantasy book, but it's also a post-apocalyptic sci-fi book as well. So we are introduced to our main character, who is a mother, and she finds her son has been killed by her husband, and her husband is now missing along with her daughter, and she doesn't know where they are, and so she decides to leave her settlement and go in search of her husband and her daughter in order to get revenge and save her daughter. We also follow two other perspectives in the story as well, which I won't say too much about because it might be a bit of spoilers. I think part of the joy is like discovering these different perspectives. And I think a highlight of this book for me was the world that was created. So we are in this very far future world, but there are hints at the old world and what occurred to turn our world that we know here into the world that exists in the fifth season. And I do love stories like that. I've recently been playing Horizon Zero Dawn on PlayStation 5, and I feel like that game and this book have similar vibes because both are in like a very distant future, but there are hints at our world, and I really like that kind of thing. I also really loved a plot point that happened at the end of the book, and I feel like really paying attention as a reader while reading the book, you can like foresee that this point is coming, but that's really fun. I love it when I figure something out because it makes me feel smart. Next is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is a fantasy story that is inspired by Viking culture. We follow three different perspectives, all of which I enjoyed. My favourite was probably Orca. So she is a mother, she has a lovely husband, and then something happens which means that she has to go on this expedition for revenge, and I do love a revenge story, and this was a really good one. I also enjoyed the perspective of Varg, who is a runaway slave, and he joins this band of Viking warriors called the Bloodsworn. And then we also follow Elvar, who joins the Battle Grimm, who are also like these Viking warriors who fight monsters. I just wanted to be a Viking while I was reading it. Even though the life of a Viking in this world, like the life expectancy is not high, but I just became very immersed in the story. I really enjoyed the characters, and a great one. Next is a very different vibe, and it's Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante. This is so well written. If you love literary writing that explores like the messy and difficult and intricacies of what it is to be a person, you'll really enjoy this. So in this book we follow a main character who has been with her husband for 15 years, and at the very beginning of the book her husband rather spontaneously leaves, and the whole book is really about her recovering and learning to live with this new life that she has now that her husband has gone. And this book is looking at how hard it can be to deal with change, how hard it can be to live with abandonment, how hard it can be when you have someone who is a consistent part of your life who is then no longer there anymore. And in this book, Elena Ferrante sometimes lingers on scenes for a long time, so it makes you feel really uncomfortable and sometimes a bit claustrophobic. For example, at one point the main character finds herself locked in her apartment, her son is really sick, her daughter is playing up, the dog seems to be dying in the other room and having diarrhea everywhere. She can't get out of her apartment. No one's really around because it's in Italy during the summer and a lot of people have gone away to holiday homes, etc. And I just kept waiting for the scene to end and for them to get out of this flat. But it took ages for that to happen. And I kind of loved that because the writer really builds this sense of anxiety, this sense of claustrophobia. And I think if you've ever felt abandoned before, or if you've ever felt rejected, this might be quite therapeutic. Next is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. This I read also because of the Women's Prize for Fiction. It was shortlisted. I don't know which book will win the Women's Prize for Fiction yet, but this is my winner. So this book is about a woman who is an older lady. I think she is maybe in her 70s, and she lives in Maryland, if I remember right, and she writes letters, and she writes letters to all sorts of people. What I loved about this book is how much it highlighted the importance of letter writing. We learned so much about this main character just through the letters that she writes and the letters that she receives. Also, the main character is able to help people through the letters she writes. She's also able to work through these difficult emotions that she has. She's able to work through her regrets and her depression and all these ugly feelings that she has through her letter writing. And yeah, I really love Sybil. What a great character. Okay, now we're on to the top 3. How exciting. So coming in at number 3 is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is one of my new favourites. This book is amazing. So in this book we follow Dana, who is a black woman who lives in the 1970s. Then kind of randomly she ends up being transported into the early 1800s when slavery was existing in America, in Southern America specifically. She sees on her first time transporting back to the early 1800s a boy who is drowning, and she manages to save his life. Then she is immediately back into the 1970s, and her husband is there, and he's like, what the hell, you just disappeared and then you came back? And she's like, I don't know what's going on. And I was immediately completely engrossed, because what a crazy thing to happen. And then she keeps going back and forth. At one point her husband comes with her, and he is a white man, so of course he's treated very differently to how she is treated during this time period. And I really liked how this book explored how we can never really escape history. History is there, and you can't just ignore it. You do need to face it and understand it. Next is Fahrenheit 451, another absolutely brilliant book. Oh my god. So this book is about a world where books have been banned, and so there are firemen, and firemen, instead of like stopping fires, they actually start fires because they're burning the books. Our main character is a fireman, and his character development throughout this book is fantastic, because he goes from burning books and hating books to slowly maybe thinking that books aren't the evil that he has been led to believe they are. But what is interesting about this world is that books haven't really been banned by the government. Books have really been banned by society as a whole, because they've willingly banned them. They have been more interested in like short form content and into listening to the radio, into these screens they have in their walls which are constantly playing this like trash TV. So what I find so interesting is that this book was written in the 1950s, but it just kind of predicts the future. It predicted the world we live in now. Books aren't banned, but less and less people are reading, and that really is a consequence of the internet. So this book, it's amazing how well it did predict where the society was heading. And I made a whole video about how interesting it is that this book predicted the future. I'll leave that down below if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts. But yeah, this is another literary book which is such a page turner. Reads like a thriller, and I love a book that is exploring these really important themes, but that it doesn't sacrifice plot as a consequence. It's still very engaging and entertaining. So my favourite book that I've read this year is technically 4 books, but they kind of can all be combined to be one long novel. And I read them as one long novel, really. I read them in very quick succession within the space of 2 weeks. So in my mind, it is one book. And this is the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. This quartet follows the life of Elena and Leila from childhood all the way up into old age. So you become very attached to the character of Elena, who is the perspective in which you read from, and you become also attached to the character of Leila, who is Elena's best friend. Elena and Leila grow up in Napoli in the 1950s, and they then grow apart, they come back together, they grow apart, they come back together. I felt like it was a very honest and truthful portrayal of female friendship. They're not always complete best friends. Sometimes they hate each other, sometimes they're very jealous of each other, sometimes they want nothing more than to never see each other again. But they always end up coming back together again because they are ultimately best friends, and they have a lot of things in common, and they make each other better people most of the time. And this book made me feel like I was Eleanor. I felt like I was living her life because of how immersive it was. Also beautiful writing, just beautiful writing. It is very therapeutic, this series, because it allows you to think about your own life and your own values, and there are quotes which just you read and then you sit with them for some time, like thinking about it. It was just such a nice feeling reading this book. My brain felt so content. And even if you don't want to commit to all 4 books, because that is quite a commitment, you could read the first book, My Brilliant Friend. But I did find that when I read My Brilliant Friend, I just wanted to read the next 3, because I was like, what? I want to know what happens in the rest of these girls' lives. I can't just end it here, because My Brilliant Friend ends like in kind of mid-adolescence. So I was very intrigued to see where these characters would end up in their 20s and in their 30s and their 40s and beyond. Amazing, the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. So those are my top 10 books out of the 51 books that I've read so far this year. What is your favourite book that you've read so far this year? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye bye!